Hi, I'm Chef Tammy Brawley from the Green Kitchen. Today I'm going to show you guys how to make some delicious scones. We're going to use my favorite ingredient, and that is ginger. Ginger, the recipe says triple ginger, but believe it or not, I have about 5 different gingers in here. So we'll talk about that as we go. But with the basic recipe, you always want to start with about 1.5 cups of quick oats. We're going to measure that out. They're going to go into the oven. I want them to toast. So I've got them on my parchment paper. Set this over by the side. I'm going to spread it out a little bit. My oven is already preheated, so we're going to move the oats to the oven for about maybe 5 to 6 minutes, maybe a little longer. And speaking of ginger, it is grown in Virginia. You can pick it up at a lot of the farmers markets, particularly the baby ginger. It's somewhat pink in nature. It's a little bit more tender, as would be any baby vegetable. But I love working with it in any way, shape, or form. So I've got my food processor here. I've got about 1.5 cups of regular flour or all-purpose flour. I'm going to go ahead and start my burner on a boil for my ginger while I'm mixing the batter. So I've got 1.5 cups of flour here. I'm going to add 1/3 cup of sugar. I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of baking powder. I'm going to talk to you about the sugar. First thing we talk about is the first incarnation of the ginger. I have candied ginger that I keep in my cabinet. You can see how much I have in my quart jar here, or quart container. I keep it there, I grind it in the food processor, and then I get a nice ginger sugar. So while the recipe says 1/3 cup sugar, I'm using 1/3 cup ginger sugar. So we're going to add that to our flour with the 2 teaspoons of baking powder. We want about 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And I'm going to come back and I'm going to add my second ginger, and that is ginger powder. It is concentrated. You do want about 1 teaspoon. I'm going to go ahead and get the food processor on and get that going. At this point, all I'm doing is blending. So I can let that sit for a moment. Our water is starting to come to a boil. Now, when you work with fresh ginger, it has a peel on it. And in some incarnations, you can just leave the peel on. Whenever I grate it for recipes, I will leave the peel on. But for this recipe for candying, I did go ahead and peel a big chunk of it here. So I'm going to move my peel out of the way. What I want to do is actually want to come back, and you want to get this really as thin as you possibly can. And I love using this. We're going to let it boil or simmer for about 10 minutes while we finish our batter for the scones. So to that, we're actually going to come back for the batter. We're going to add some cold butter while the processor is going on. I've cut it into diced pieces. You just wouldn't want to add the whole 1/2 cup in there, 8 to 10 tablespoons. It's going to blend quite nicely. This is ready. I'm going to now move this to a larger bowl. If you actually put your finger underneath, you can hold that food processor blade in place and dump your food processor out, and lo and behold, that blade stays. So in this, we have the flour and the sugar and the butter and a little salt and baking powder. We are going to now add some chopped candied ginger. Now this is ginger I did purchase from the grocery store. You can get it where they sell bulk nuts and things like that, or you can come back and add the candied ginger that we're going to make. So in this case, I've already diced it up. I'm going to put it in here. I will say that you find that the grocery store ginger is going to be very hard. So this is one last piece. It takes me a minute to get through this even with a very sharp knife. This is my 3rd incarnation of the ginger. Candied ginger going into the ginger powder and the ginger sugar. So we're going to mix that up a little bit with our hand. And what we're coming back for is the toasted oats that are in the oven. They should be out in about 5 minutes or so, maybe a little bit less. In the meantime, we're going to take a whole egg, crack it into a measure. And we want actually 1/4 cup of heavy cream and 1/4 cup milk, or 1/2 cup of half and half. I already have that measured out in there. We're going to whisk up that egg and the cream together. We're going to set that over to the side while we check our oats to see if they are ready yet. And probably about another minute they will be ready. So now that our fresh ginger that I peeled and sliced very thinly, it's gone in about a half a cup of water here. What we're going to do is we're actually going to drain that and do it a second time. Seems like an extra step, but what we're doing is we're softening the ginger at this point. So I'm going to get a strainer here. I'm going to pour the water out. That sounds like our oven might be ready there. All right, so we emptied the first batch of water with the soft ginger. We're going to let this boil again for another few seconds or so. Then we're going to empty it and do one more time with the water, except we're going to be adding some sugar to it at this point. Now, the recipe that you're going to see calls for 4 pounds of ginger. You really aren't going to need that much. But if you can decrease that recipe, so for 4 ounces of ginger, we want basically 1 cup of water and 1 cup of sugar. And that's going to give us our syrup that we need. So now I'm going to go ahead and empty this. All right, that can wait off to the side for a second while I get a cup of water to go in our pot. And we want a cup of sugar. I'm going to go ahead and use ginger sugar again. I could use granulated sugar if I wanted to, but I have all this. It's beautiful. I may as well use it. So we want about a cup of sugar. I know it looks like a lot, but we're candying that ginger, so that's the whole point. Add that. I will whisk that up. I've got this on a rapid boil again. That ginger sugar will dissolve in there, and we're going to go ahead and add that sliced thin ginger that I had earlier. And what's going to happen is we're going to let that simmer now for about, I don't know, maybe a half an hour or so, and then the syrup will be nice and clear, and the ginger will taste very sweet. I'm going to come back to my batter now for my scones. I'm going to go ahead and add my toasted oats. You may even want to let them cool off a little bit more, but that's okay. We're going to get them mixed in there soon enough. I'm going to reuse my parchment paper, which you'll see in a few moments. I'm going to come in here and I'm mixing up all that I've put into it. And then I'm going to come back with that egg and cream mixture. Now I've turned the ginger off, the fresh ginger, the candied ginger, because now I just want it to sit for a while. After it sits for a while and cools off, you can pour the syrup with the fresh ginger into a jar, and you'll have that for whatever you want to use it for. All right, so we're going to come back now with that egg and the cream. I am going to reserve just about a tablespoon, and you'll see why in a few moments. These are great also if you use a silicone baking mat. I think it's known as a Silpat if I'm not mistaken. So we're going to push our batter onto the parchment paper. You kind of want to put this in a circle. You know, it can be rustic. Don't worry about measuring or anything like that. Push it down. You want it to be about 1 inch thick, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. Now I'm going to cut it into wedges. In this case, I'm going to say let's do 6 portions. So we'll cut each half into thirds. We're going to separate these a little bit. I'm going to come back with that extra tablespoon of cream and milk that I put together with the egg, and I'm going to baste the tops of the scones. So now I've got ginger sugar again, and we're going to sprinkle it over the top. And in this case, you can also come back with turbinado again, as I mentioned earlier, or a raw sugar. Does not have to be a ginger sugar. All right, these are going to go into the oven for about 20 minutes or so, maybe 30, depending on your oven. They have come out of the oven. I wanted you to see what I've done is I've taken them off the pan. They're actually beautiful. Maybe could have done a little bit more browning on the top, but what I like to check is how brown they are on the bottom. Again, that's going to depend on your oven, and maybe you have hot spots, maybe we do. But anyway, I've taken them off and I'm letting them cool off just a little bit further, and I'm going to let that happen while I make our glaze. We have got a half a cup of confectioner's sugar here, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back with yet more ginger, and we're going to use the ginger syrup from where I candied the ginger on the burner a little while ago. So I'm going to come back and I'm going to add 2 tablespoons. I'm going to whisk that up. This is kind of important to measure, to be quite honest, because sometimes if you just go to pour, you could add too much and it would be too thin. So you really want to make sure that you get a nice balance of confectioner's sugar and ginger syrup. You want a nice drippable consistency here, and we're going to come back and we're just going to go back and forth. So it's a lot of ginger going on, absolutely my favorite scone to make. And there you have it. Cinco ginger scones. I'm Tammy Brawley with The Green Kitchen. Join us next time on Heart of the Home.
Recipes from the Heart of the Home can be found on the Virginia Farm Bureau website at vafb.com/recipes, as well as on Chef Tammy Brawley's website at greenkitchenrichmond.com.